Every crew operating in the Klondike is chasing the biggest gold numbers of their careers. But with freeze-up bearing down and the margin for error completely gone, the stakes have never been higher. Parker Schnabel is within striking distance of an all-time gold rush record, running a $1 million machine that keeps breaking down. Rick Ness is one bad decision away from losing everything. Beets has a crew that is falling apart at exactly the wrong moment. And Beets is making a move that could completely redraw the map of Klondike mining. This episode changes everything. This whole endeavor could be the thing that makes my entire life great, or it could be the thing that destroys it. The 4-plant gamble. Right now at Duncan Creek, 4 wash plants are moving dirt simultaneously. Bob is running. Big Red is running. Roxanne is running. And the Golden Goose, Gigi, the $1 million centerpiece of Parker Schnabel's most aggressive season to date, is running. We've got a lot of ground to get through still, and the name of the game is just keeping these wash plants running. We've got 4 plants and it's just sluice, sluice, sluice. On paper, this looks like a mining operation firing on all cylinders. On the ground, it is one of the most complex and expensive logistical challenges Parker has ever taken on. And the window to make it all pay is shrinking every single day. Season 16 is Parker's most expensive and most ambitious push. He started the year with setbacks that would have broken a less experienced operation. Low recovery rates out of the gate, costly downtime, and production numbers that made a record season look like a distant long shot. Parker responded by scaling up rather than pulling back. For plants running at once. The kind of move that either defines a season as historic or exposes its overreach before freeze-up arrives. Duncan Creek is the engine powering this season. It is Parker's richest ground and the place where a record ounce count gets built. But Parker is not managing Dominion alone. He needs Foreman Mitch Blaszczak delivering strong results at Ken Stewart's ground at the same time. Solid weekly numbers from that site every single week just to stay on pace. If Mitch's output at Ken Stewart drops below what the record run requires, Parker has no margin to recover it anywhere else. The math is simple and completely unforgiving. Both production sites have to perform or the record slips away. Then there is Gigi. At $1 million, the Golden Goose is not just another wash plant. She is a weekly financial obligation. Parker needs her producing meaningful ounces on every single shift she runs. She's come at a very good time because we have a lot of sluicing to do, and I'm sure this plant is going to get the job done. Earlier this season, Gigi went down at a critical moment and cost Parker production days he could never recover. That breakdown was not a one-off anomaly. It was a warning sign. When you run a machine that expensive on a compressed timeline, the gap between an inconvenient breakdown and a catastrophic one is much narrower than it appears from the outside. Gigi going down in the final weeks of the season, not for a day, but for 3 or 4 consecutive days, is the scenario Parker cannot afford and cannot fully prevent. Running 4 plants simultaneously means maintaining 4 separate material supply chains at the same time. Albert Roadshaw is managing the ground-moving logistics, the excavators, the haul trucks, the rotation between dig faces, and every gap in that rotation costs output. A machine pulled for maintenance mid-shift, a fuel delay, a bottleneck at the conveyor feed. Any one of those things starves a plant of raw material. And a plant without material does not produce gold. It just sits there burning time that Parker does not have. Parker cannot absorb a 0 output day from any one of his 4 operations in these final weeks without that 0 showing up directly in his total. The manpower situation is equally tight. Each plant needs operators who know the machine intimately, who can hear the difference between normal mechanical noise and a sound that signals something is about to fail. When Parker pulls an experienced operator from one plant to cover an emergency at another, he puts a less experienced hand on a machine that represents an enormous investment and an even more enormous expectation. Parker is making those redistribution calls right now in real time. Which plant needs the best people most urgently? Which site can run a little short-handed for a few hours? Every one of those calls has a cost that shows up in the cleanup at the end of the week. Everything up here is risk over reward, and right now the risk is we've got ourselves a lot of dirt to move here. Not much time, but Parker believes the reward is worth it. The decision Parker is currently wrestling with is whether to voluntarily idle Roxanne, taking one plant offline deliberately, accepting a guaranteed production loss in order to free up the crew and maintenance resources needed to keep Gigi and Dominion running cleanly. It sounds counterintuitive to shut down a producing plant in order to protect a record run, but a plant running below capacity because it is starved of material or operating shorthanded is not much better than a plant that is simply offline, and it carries the added risk of a breakdown that takes it offline anyway. Parker knows this. The question is whether he pulls the trigger on the idle before something forces his hand. Record gold runs are not made by the miner who takes the most risks at the end of the season. They are made by the miner who knows precisely which risks to absorb and which ones to eliminate before they turn catastrophic. Parker Schnabel has spent 16 seasons learning that lesson. Episode 20 is where it gets tested at the highest stakes of his career. The king of the Klondike and his heir. Tony Beets has already surpassed his season target. 2 wash plants are running at Indian River. Mike Beets is overseeing Paradise Hill. Gold is sitting at around $2,300 an ounce. Tony's operation is producing at full capacity, and every additional ounce he pulls from this point forward is pure margin on top of a goal he has already achieved. Tony is not chasing a record. Tony is doing something more calculated and, in some ways, more consequential. He is reshaping the power structure of the Klondike before this season even ends. The $4 million investment in the Wounded Moose ground is the number that complicates Tony's otherwise dominant season. Water license issues have kept that ground completely locked. Not a single ounce mined from it. No use crying over spilled milk. It is what it is. It would have been nice to sluice that just to see what was in there, whatever we bought. But that is not going to happen. We've got no license. In the meantime, we might as well go make some money. What do you think? Yeah. Every week Wounded Moose sits idle. Tony carries the cost of owning ground he cannot use. That is a real financial drag on a season where his active sites are performing well. He has redirected resources toward the Hester Cut expansion to compensate. The Hester expansion is producing, but Wounded Moose still sits there for $1 million of frozen opportunity, waiting on a bureaucratic resolution that has not come. At $2,300 an ounce, that ground needs to produce roughly 1,740 ounces just to break even on the original investment. Tony has not mined a single one of them yet. Tony has made an offer to buy out Rick Ness. That move makes complete sense from where Tony sits. Rick's claims sit adjacent to ground Tony already controls, and Rick's financial position after a brutal season means the terms of any deal favor Tony significantly. If Tony acquires Rick's operation, he adds another section of the Klondike to an empire that is already the most dominant in the region. This is not generosity. It is expansion strategy. And it signals that Tony Beets is already thinking about next season and the one after that, while everyone else is focused on simply surviving this one. At Paradise Hill, Mike Beets is running the site, and right now, Paradise Hill has a ground problem that Mike has to solve without Tony standing beside him. The material coming out of the current cut is not reading the way the sampling suggested. The grade is lower than projected, and the volume is not making up for it. Mike needs to make a call. Push deeper into the existing face and gamble that the grade improves, or redirect the excavator and open a fresh area, burning time to find ground that might perform better. Either choice carries a cost. Pushing deeper on low-grade material runs the plant at reduced efficiency. Opening a new area takes days to set up and puts the plant on standby during the transition. Tony is watching Paradise Hill's numbers. He has not intervened. That restraint is deliberate. Mike either figures this out or he doesn't. And Tony learning which of those is true right now, with real gold on the line, is worth more to him than any output he might rescue by stepping in. At $2,300 an ounce, a week of wrong decisions at Paradise Hill costs real money. Tony is willing to pay that cost to find out what Mike does under genuine pressure. The deeper issue at Paradise Hill is that Mike is making calls that ripple well beyond the current shift. If he redirects the excavator and opens a new area, he is committing crew and equipment to a fresh cut that could take 3 or 4 days to set up and begin feeding the plant. During those days, the plant runs at reduced capacity or not at all. If that new area delivers strong ground, Mike looks like a mine boss who made a bold call and got it right. If it delivers the same low-grade material the current face is producing, He has burned days he cannot recover on a gamble that did not pay off. Things break consistently. It's nothing but a headache this year trying to get going. I got her going. She's still going and I'm going to keep on going. It doesn't mean I can't ask. When is it going to stop? Tony has been in that exact position before, more times than he can count. The difference is that when Tony makes a wrong call, he has decades of accumulated capital and credibility to absorb the consequences. Mike is still building both of those things. A wrong call at Paradise Hill right now does not just cost ounces. It costs Mike standing in his own operation with his own crew, in a season where he is trying to prove he belongs in the chair he is sitting in. Tony knows that. It is part of why he is letting Mike feel the full weight of this decision without a safety net. The Beets operation does not produce strong successors by shielding them from the cost of being wrong. Rick Ness fighting for survival. Duncan Creek sits at the center of a deal involving both Parker Schnabel and Tony Beets. Parker has ground connecting to Duncan Creek. Tony is making moves in the same area. And Rick Ness, whose season is unraveling at every seam, is the third name in that conversation, staring at a claim that could either offer him a path forward or pile six-figure losses on top of an already devastating year. That context matters because it tells you something critical about the position Rick is negotiating from. He is not coming to the Duncan Creek table with leverage. He is coming with desperation, which is the worst possible negotiating position when the other two parties at the table are Parker Schnabel and Tony Beets. The Valhalla cut was supposed to be Rick's primary production site this season. His excavator hit a 30-foot clay layer buried beneath the surface and the operation stopped cold. A clay layer that size is not a minor obstacle you dig through on a timeline. It is a wall. Getting through it or around it is not a one-week fix. It cost Rick weeks of production in a season that had no weeks to spare. Valhalla is done for the year. You know, I really thought this whole Valhalla cut was going to be huge for us. Bailey, get us out of this clay layer. We just have no way to deal with that this year. It's just not going to work. Rick walked away from it with no gold and a significant investment in prep work that paid back absolutely nothing. Vegas Valley is where Rick turns next. The last time Rick worked that ground, it produced roughly $2 million in gold. That payout rescued his operation when it needed saving most, and the memory of that outcome is part of why Rick keeps returning to this patch of ground when everything else fails him. But Vegas Valley is not a reliable fallback. It is a site Rick abandoned just 7 weeks ago because of a slope instability problem on the cut wall, a real structural hazard, not a precautionary measure. Before a single loader turns a wheel at Vegas Valley, Rick needs that wall assessed by someone qualified to declare it safe to work near. That assessment takes time. Time Rick spends on safety remediation is time he is not spending moving gold-bearing material through a wash plant. If Vegas Valley performs close to its previous rate, Rick covers his operating costs for the season and keeps his operation solvent going into next year. That is the number he is working toward. Not a record, not a strong season, just enough to stay in business. It is a humbling target for a miner of Rick's experience, and it tells you everything about how badly this season has gone. The Duncan Creek question is where the real risk lives. The claim has gold potential. The sampling data points in the right direction. But sampling and production are two completely different conversations in the Klondike, and Rick Ness has been burned by that gap before. The cost of getting into a Duncan Creek deal is not just the buy-in price. It is the full operational commitment, equipment, fuel, crew time, all of it invested in ground that might not deliver what the samples suggest. A wrong call on Duncan Creek does not just hurt this year's numbers. It puts next season at risk before the ground even thaws. Rick's exposure on a bad Duncan Creek investment runs to 6 figures on top of an already damaged balance sheet. The way Rick frames it internally is straightforward. Vegas Valley is a known risk. Duncan Creek is an unknown one. He has managed known risks his entire mining career. The unknown is what transforms a bad season into an existential crisis. Whatever Rick decides about Duncan Creek in this episode is not simply a business decision. It is a statement about what kind of miner he is going to be when the easy answers are gone and every available option has a serious downside attached to it. Rick has built his entire career on backing his own instincts, on believing that his read of the ground and the situation is sound enough to justify the risk. Every time I think I'm getting ahead, I just get pushed back again. I'm not crying about it. I'm here to take it. I'm here to do it. But when is enough enough? When there's a guarantee put in front of you, when do you just say, I'll take that and I'll quit fighting? This season has tested that belief more directly than any season he has faced before. Valhalla said no. Vegas Valley said not yet. Now Duncan Creek is offering something that looks like yes. But the people at the table with him are Parker Schnabel and Tony Beets, two of the most calculating operators in the Klondike. Rick has to decide whether the opportunity is genuine or whether he is about to buy into something that benefits the other two parties at his expense. That is the position Rick Ness is in right now. Not just geologically challenged, not just financially stretched, but navigating a deal where the other parties have stronger balance sheets, more ground, and far less urgency than he does. And the Klondike, as it always has, will render its verdict on that decision in ounces. Make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss the final episodes of Season 16. And drop your answer in the comments. Who makes it out of this season on top? Parker, Tony, Rick, or Kevin? Kevin Beets. The hardest test of leadership. Kevin Beets set a 2,000-ounce target for this season. Right now, he is tracking behind it. The weekly production Kevin needs from his operation to close that gap is tightening every time a shift comes up short. And shifts are coming up short because of a personnel situation on his site that has been building for weeks and remains unresolved. The situation involves Taven Peterson, and it is showing up directly in the production numbers. On screen, the conflict plays out through a visible and repeating pattern. Instructions being disregarded, safety protocols not being followed, and a working environment where Kevin's authority is being undermined in ways that affect how the entire site functions. Kevin has addressed it verbally more than once. The behavior has not changed, and every week this continues. Kevin's weekly output reflects it. Kevin now has two options, and neither one is clean. He removes Taven from the operation, takes the hit of losing one worker during the most critical production weeks of the season, but regains full control of his site and makes it unmistakably clear that standards on his operation are not negotiable. Fewer operators means slower material movement through the plant. Slower material movement means fewer ounces in the weekly cleanup. At $2,300 an ounce, losing 30 to 40 ounces in a single week because of a reduced crew costs Kevin somewhere between $70,000 and $90,000 in season revenue. That is the price of making the decisive call. A little bit of accounting and the books. We're pretty far away from our 2,000-ounce goal. Things are getting pretty bad. Or Kevin keeps Taven on site and tries to manage the situation through to freeze up. Hold the line on verbal correction. Hope the behavior stabilizes before it escalates into something worse. The risk there is that it does not stabilize, that it escalates into a safety incident. A piece of equipment operated incorrectly at the wrong moment. A protocol bypassed in a way that triggers a mandatory site shutdown. A forced shutdown in the final weeks does not cost Kevin a cleanup. Costs Kevin the season. With a 2,000-ounce target and Kevin currently running behind pace, losing the final weeks of production does not just mean missing the goal. It means finishing a second season without being able to justify the operation's costs. There is another layer to this that Kevin is carrying that does not show up in the ounce count. Kevin Beets is in his second year as a mine boss. He is out from under his father's direct oversight, running his own operation and making his own calls. The way he handles the situation is going to define how his crew understands his leadership. Not just Taven, but every other person on that site who is watching to see what Kevin does when someone pushes back against his authority. Tony Beets dealt with problems like this quickly. Tony made the call and moved on. What Kevin is learning in real time with real money on the line is that knowing what Tony would do and actually doing it yourself are two completely different things. Leadership is not inherited. It is demonstrated decision by decision in exactly the kinds of moments Kevin is sitting in right now. Gold can be replaced. Credibility as a leader is far harder to rebuild once it's gone. And at $2,300 an ounce, every day Kevin defers the call on this situation is another day his 2,000-ounce target moves further out of reach. What makes Kevin's situation genuinely difficult, not just strategically, but personally, is that he is operating without the institutional authority Tony has spent decades building. When Tony tells someone on his crew how things are going to go, that instruction lands differently than the same instruction coming from a second-year mine boss. Kevin has the title. He does not yet have the weight of history behind it. Every decision he makes this season is also an argument for why he deserves to keep making decisions. Showing weakness on a personnel call, hesitating, managing the situation instead of deciding, chips away at that argument in a way that gold tonnage alone cannot repair. We're near the end of the season and we don't have much time. If he goes sideways, we want to make sure this operation is going somewhere this week. I think we're going to need a big gold total. Kevin's operation has the ground and the equipment to hit 2,000 ounces. That is not in question. What is in question is whether Kevin can stabilize his crew environment enough to allow the operation to perform the way it is fully capable of performing. Right now, the instability on his site is costing him more ounces per week than any mechanical failure or poor ground reading would. It is the most expensive kind of problem a mine boss faces, the kind that does not appear as a line item anywhere, but shows up every single week in the total that lands on the scale. Where the season stands. Parker Schnabel is within range of a record season and running 4 wash plants to get there. At current gold prices, the difference between a strong finish and an all-time record finish is worth millions of dollars. And the margin between those two outcomes comes down to Gigi's reliability and Mitch Blaschik's output at Cannon Stewart's ground. One plant going dark in the final weeks does not just cost Parker volume. It ends the record conversation entirely. Tony Beets has passed his season target and is actively making acquisitions. His Indian River and Paradise Hill operations are running cleanly. Mike Beets is making real production decisions at Paradise Hill without a safety net, and those decisions are showing up directly in the season total. Tony is still building week by week. Wounded Moose remains locked, $4 million sitting idle in the Klondike. But Tony has already absorbed that reality and moved forward. Rick Ness is working 2 problems simultaneously, getting Vegas Valley safe enough to mine and deciding whether the Duncan Creek deal is a genuine lifeline or a carefully laid trap. His season total is the lowest on the leaderboard by a significant margin, and Freeze Up closes the window on both options at exactly the same time. Rick does not have the luxury of tackling these decisions in sequence. He has to solve both at once. Kevin Beets needs to make a decision, and he needs to make it before the next cleanup. Every day the crew situation on his site remains unresolved is another day his 2,000-ounce target drifts further away. At $2,300 an ounce, the total gap between where Kevin currently sits and where he set out to be is worth over $1 million. That is not a rounding error. That is the difference between a season he can build on and a season he has to explain. The Klondike is unforgiving in a way that strips everything back to its bare essentials. Gold is sitting above $2,300 an ounce. Freeze Up arrives on the same date for everyone, regardless of where anyone stands on the leaderboard, regardless of how close anyone is to a record, and regardless of how many decisions are still sitting unresolved. One miner is chasing history. One is expanding his empire. One is fighting to stay solvent. And one is learning, at full cost with no more time to defer the lesson, exactly what it takes to lead when the stakes are real and every option is a bad one. The last few weeks have been really difficult and set us back quite a bit. Low recovery, low ounces per hour, lost production hours, and just being a general pain right now. What happens in this episode does not stay in this episode. Parker's record run, if it survives the next few weeks, will define how Season 16 is remembered for years to come. Tony's acquisition moves, if the Rick Ness deal closes, will redraw the map of Klondike mining in ways that reverberate into next season. Rick's Duncan Creek decision, right or wrong, will follow him into his next contract negotiation, his next conversation with investors, and his next season opener when someone asks him what happened in 2024. And Kevin's personnel call, whether he makes it or continues to put it off, becomes the story his crew tells about him long after the season is over. Every one of these 4 men is making a decision this week that matters well beyond the cleanup at the end of it. For miners, for completely different crises. One season running out of time. The gold is there. It has always been there in the Klondike. The only question that has ever mattered in this business is whether you have what it takes to get it out of the ground before the window closes. For Parker, Tony, Rick, and Kevin, that window is shutting fast. And whatever happens in episode 20 is going to echo through every season that follows. Who do you think comes out of season 16 on top? Drop your prediction in the comments below and subscribe so you don't miss how this ends.